values and opinions. Media has the power to either nurture a democratic society or lead to polarization and crisis. This is where AI for Media comes into play. AI for Media is a European project funded under the Horizon 2020 program, in which 30 leading partners in the areas of artificial intelligence and media join forces with a large pool of associate members to actively contribute to Europe's unique human-centric and trustworthy brand of artificial intelligence benefiting the media sector. Our goal? To deliver the next generation of AI research and training at the service of media, society and democracy, ensuring the embedding of European values of ethical and trustworthy AI in future deployments. But how will we get there? Here is our action plan. AI for Media will define a European AI research agenda and observatory, conduct multiple research and innovation activities, bring AI expertise to real-world applications through use cases, facilitate access to equity-free funding for innovative research and applications in the AI sector, and develop an AI doctoral academy called ADA. All this and more will make AI for Media a virtual center of excellence and ecosystem of international reference. During the project, we expect to create a support base for researchers in the field of media-related AI research, strengthen the interaction between academia and industry, financially assist the external exploitation of ideas, promote ethical AI guided by European values, demonstrate AI applications in real-world challenges, generate a set of tangible breakthroughs, novel algorithms and technologies in 4 specific areas: new machine learning paradigms, explainability, robustness and privacy in AI without sacrificing data utility, content-centered AI, human and society-centered AI. Enrich the EU AI on-demand platform. Technology is shaping our democracy. At AI for Media, we are working hard to make sure artificial intelligence is used to promote media diversity, freedom of expression and inclusiveness. Want to learn more? Go to ai4media.eu. AI for Media, artificial intelligence for the media and society.
technology revolution has led us to a crossroads. With Humane AI Net, we will guide Europe towards a better future in this new era. For humanity, with AI, from Europe. The potential of artificial intelligence is massive. Imagine businesses and factories prospering and being profitable while providing their employees good working hours, healthcare, equality, and the best benefits of a working life. Humane AI Net is about technology that will help Europe achieve this vision and sustain it in a competitive, globalized world. For people, for the planet, and for prosperity.
What we really need to do is think about AI as a way of empowering human beings, making human beings better.
A brighter future requires science. In Humane AI Net, we are working on science and innovations for humans. We will work to create AI that respects human autonomy, AI that is fair, transparent, and within the rule of law. AI that increases our abilities as workers, our insight as decision makers, our enjoyment as customers, and our well-being as individuals. AI that helps strengthen our democracy and assure a better society for all. From Turkey to Ireland, from Portugal to the Scandinavian north, within Humane AI Net, researchers, innovators and practitioners join forces to leverage the AI revolution to strengthen the European economy and society and to empower all people across Europe. With the concept of micro-projects, we combine the benefits of a pan-European network with research in small agile groups to provide tangible results that will drive European research and innovation. With the AI revolution in full swing, key industrial players are already engaged in Humane AI Net to build an innovation ecosystem where all companies, from small to big, can grow.
What would be my dream is to really change the future to something we all want to live in.
Looks like perhaps there is a sound issue with this video here.
Apparently.
It is a silent video. Interesting.
Too much noise in this one.
All right, and it also is pretty brief. Okay, great. Well, 3 of them worked out very nicely. You can see it needs probably AI to get to 4 out of 4, and it needs a little bit more work. Anyway, I hope you learned some interesting things about the activities that are going on throughout Europe. These projects, big projects, they will be running for 1 or 2 years longer, as the case may be. Now I'm going to turn it over to Carl, who will introduce the panelists and talk a little bit about the panel itself. Carl, please take it away.
Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. I think there are a few seats, so you could come maybe closer. If not, if you're too shy, or thank you, David. Thank you for sacrificing yourself. So the goal of today is indeed to highlight some of the impacts, also potential that AI is bringing to Europe. And I think through the different testers and these also test and experience and demonstrators, you've been able to see different applications for different domains. And I think the goal for today is to maybe also sensitize you on how AI in Europe can impact different domains, from education to governance to arts and also to research. So I will invite all the speakers to come also. First, Marc Schonauer. So he's a research director at INRIA. INRIA is specialized in hard sciences in Europe, in France. He joined in 2001 after 20 years with another research center in France. He founded Tao team at INRIA, and his work is also specifically at the intersection of evolutionary computation, machine learning, and he's the author of more than 150 papers, co-advisor of also more than 35 PhD students. That's a hell of a task, so congratulations. I'm now also calling Athena. So if you can come, Athena is currently a PhD candidate with the Artificial Intelligence Research Institute in Barcelona. She's working on developing AI tools. You might have also seen her during the demonstration. And really her goal is to try to solve the team formation problems under the supervision of Professor Carlecera and Juan Rodriguez Aguilar. Her PhD studies are funded by the consultation company Enzyme Advising Group. And now I have the pleasure of inviting Evangelia. So Evangelia is working at DG Connect, and she's the head of sector on artificial intelligence, technology, deployment, and impact at the European Commission, and has been a program and policy officer at DG Connect for a few years. And now Dewi. Dewi Brumet is passionate about origami for 10 years. He's an artist, and recently has also been more passionate about the textile pleating. He has been developing strong skills and knowledge for folding and has been collaborating recently with researchers to develop soft robots. So we have a very interesting panel today to maybe also present some of the diversity that we have in Europe when it comes to AI. So I have a very broad question to start with. It's maybe let's start with you, Marc, is what brought you to AI? And in a few sentences, explain us how you came to this field.
Yes, hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, so okay, when I graduated so many years ago, there were not even courses in computer science. So I was an applied mathematician, and then started to use computer science, and gradually starting to use computers to do, as Olga pointed out, to compute things in applied math and numerical simulations. And gradually I came to think and work about meshes. So maybe you've heard about meshes with the first demo over there. You want to define, to partition the space into small elements so you can make computation there. And it's an art. Designing meshes, it's an art. And I was trying to, well, not only me, but to come up with the rules to define a good mesh, because you have good meshes and bad meshes that give lousy results. And at that time was also the time of expert systems. You might have heard about expert systems. And so it was a natural move to expert systems. But at the same time, when you know how to simulate and to predict what's going to happen, you also want to optimize. That is, you want to tune the parameters of your part or your system to reach a certain goal. And this sometimes called an inverse problem, and this sometimes, and very often in mathematics, this is ill-posed. And to solve ill-posed problem, well, the standard mathematician algorithm didn't work, and I turned to another side of what is now AI, which is optimization, and in particular stochastic optimization and evolutionary computation. And then gradually this led me further away from math and closer to AI. I just want to recall that at that time, AI was, at least in France, this Cartesian country with full of great mathematicians, was quite a rude world. You should not say you were doing AI. So, but this has changed, of course. Now it's very nice and to be recognized as an AI researcher. So this is basically how I
Thank
came
you.
to AI.
Now, Evangelia, also maybe you could explain also the key role that you have even for an event like today, coordinating efforts in terms of artificial intelligence. You should have a microphone close to you. So how did you come to working on AI?
Okay, so actually when I finished school, I knew that I wanted to do something with psychology, but I also wanted to do something with technology. And in Stuttgart, where I was living, they had this kind of new degree. It was called computational linguistics, so natural language processing. So actually was dealing with artificial intelligence without it being necessarily tech artificial intelligence. There was machine translation. We worked with neural networks. And then this is how I actually came also to work at the European Commission, because the unit back then was dealing with the linguistic interfaces, technologies. Now, coincidentally, I worked then in other units as well, but I ended up in the same unit that in the meantime was dealing with robotics and artificial intelligence. So in a way, it was always following me wherever I was going. So it was not necessarily a kind of decision, but it kind of happened naturally, I would say.
All right, thank you, and you will have a chance to also explain what you do and your impact. So, Athena, so how did you come to work on artificial intelligence?
Well, I was studying computer engineering, and at some point I find it very fascinating the fact that we can use something that is very abstract, like math, to do something very concrete, which is to automate things and that make their own decisions. And all the story of artificial intelligence, that we can have help from a machine just to do complex things that we should spend hours and hours by doing it manually. So I got this idea it was very fun for me.
Okay.
And I was very impressed at the time. So.
I hope you still are. Okay. Dewi, maybe also for you, you have an interesting profile. So please explain to us also how you came to work on robots.
So yeah, I'm an artist more on manual things. So normally I don't need technology, but I got into this more with Fab Labs, mainly with the Open Fab in Brussels. And so more with values of sharing new ways of doing things and finding new ways of doing my art and creativity, and also on the research level, collaborating with INRIA Defrost Lab in Lille also.
All right, thank you. So as we will talk about AI and society, I also want to say to the audience that if you have questions, we will have a moment at the end, but also if you have a burning question, it is okay. You can also raise your hand, and if I'm turned this way, you can call me. So maybe with you, Evangelia, can you explain a little bit what your role in regards to AI, and maybe the role of your office in regards to AI can be for society, and maybe the mission that you have and how you think the two collide?
So basically, when it comes to artificial intelligence, we are two units in the DG, in DG Connect at the European Commission, and what we're basically trying to do is to implement the European approach of AI, so the ecosystem of trust, so trustworthy AI, but also the ecosystem of excellence when it comes to research excellence. And we believe that, I mean, this European approach, as you all probably all know, the European Commission published last year a draft AI regulation that's supposed to also create the digital single market for AI in Europe and allow also innovators and industry kind of to know within which framework they can actually develop, and while also stimulating innovation. So our role in my unit is really to fund also projects that are in line with this European approach in trustworthy AI, so AI that is fair, transparent, explainable, unbiased, etc., etc. So this is the work that we are doing, and at the same time we're also busy in the European Commission on the one hand side research project, but also on the other hand with the deployment. There is a Digital Europe program. We will set up also now now testing and experimentation facilities, because a lot of things is happening in the lab, but we also want to bring from the lab to the market the AI technology, so we have to test it in real-world environments and make sure also that it's kind of robust. So this is, I think, the role that we're doing. The regulation, as I said, to put the framework within which, while respecting the fundamental values of the EU, also allow for innovation when it comes to AI.
And could you explain for those of you maybe who don't know what DigiConnect is, what is exactly DigiConnect?
Well, I think, as the word says, is connecting, but connecting with technologies. So the DG deals with a variety of technologies, mostly digital technologies. So you could say it's the digital Directorate General within the European Commission.
Okay, thank you very much. And as you said, it's also about connecting with research, and we know that these technologies are fueled by research and a lot of investments in research. And maybe, Mark, you could tell us a little bit about what you have observed in the past years in terms of AI research. What are maybe the big changes and where it's maybe headed, if you have a few sentences or words of wisdom on that? Big question.
Yes. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I'm very uncomfortable with giving a definition of AI. I mean, there has been a lot of tentative definitions, like mimicking the human brain, the human reasoning, or the functioning of the human brain. My favorite definition, and I want to give it here because it impacts the rest of what I'm going to say, is attributed to Jean-Louis Laurière in the 80s, a French pioneer of AI. And it says that AI is succeeding in making the computer doing something it has never been done by a computer before. So that's great. That covers many things. Then, of course, when a pocket calculator was invented, it was AI, but now it's just a routine tool, and this is true for many things. Today, if you want to look at the let's say, recent successes in computer vision, for instance, face recognition, object recognition, and so forth, which is one of the recent highlights. But today you can find off-the-shelf programs that do this. So is it still AI, or is it just programming, computing? Well, the question at least needs to be asked. And basically, that's also what Holger described as AI being a very complex way of programming. But sometimes in complex systems, it's becoming so complex, it gives outcomes that were not expected. That's one of the definitions of complex systems. And so it can happen that, yes, AI gives a sense of human intelligence. But, okay, to me, just a very a way of programming, a new way of programming, with new tools that has been, as it has been evolving in the past. So, what are the main trends? Well, here again, we should go back to history maybe. AI, as many things in computer science, you can attribute some roots to Alan Turing. Can machine think? I mean, he wrote a book about can machine think, and in this book he already said that if you want to program something that's very complex, like the human brain, back on the envelope computation gives that you would need, I don't know, thousands of years just to write this. So the only way is to teach the machine, to teach the computer. And so you already advocate something which is known as, well, reinforcement learning or machine learning in general. At the same time, or a little bit later, the first time the word artificial intelligence was used is the famous Dartmouth workshop in '56. So it's not recent, as you can see. But these guys, the most famous computer scientists at the time, hypothesis that you can reproduce the functioning of the brain with logical operations. And so the goal was to mimic the brain with some logical operation. If it's only logical operations, then a computer should be able to do the same. And this tendency was let's say, dominant for some time. So, okay, I will make a long story short. There are many what's called AI winters, because AI promised a lot and delivered little. And And then some new techniques appeared, like expert system. They promised a lot and they delivered a little. So you can continue this this story for some time. So that was called symbolic AI. At the same time, you had what was called, let's say, subsymbolic or numeric AI. And that's what's the recent, let's say, revival of AI in the 2010s, which was, as I said, computer science and, computer vision and deep learning revolution. And that's where we are today. But if I can continue, I think the future of AI lies in some in between this symbolic and deep learning, in between by hybridization. I can develop later if you want.
Thank you. And I think you've mentioned a few important ideas. The first one also being that it has systems can learn as well. And I think as a whole, the field can also learn from other disciplines. And I think also that's where you can bring something very interesting. And you are working with roboticists who also use AI softwares. But maybe you can explain how you've seen the collaboration between artists and scientists, computer scientists, and how that works, and how do you think that can be promising?
Yeah, so I've been working the past 6 months with this lab, Defrost of INRIA, and I think it's really interesting because I sometimes feel that artists and scientists is the face of the same coin, and sometimes we have the same goal, but we take different paths, and sometimes control-wise, etc. And I think it's interesting to be part of this project because sometimes scientists or researchers, because they need funding, they need to publicize or whatsoever. They have things that they tend to avoid things that I would, as an artist, feel as important. If a robot fails, for example, in the fields of prototyping, if they glitch or something, for me it's really interesting. Sometimes I bring it. They take it as an error. I take it as something positive. I transform it, and then sometimes it can get back into the research because I modify it and I add some new things to it. And I think as an artist also I bring competencies that sometimes research would not have, as to sharing, for example, and transmitting research in other ways than publication. I mean, my work is a lot about visual things, so I would say that I know how to make it, how to share it, I would say. And of course, they help me in fields that I would not have the competency in it, in technical fields, but also I think in ways they are making robots. When they are making robots, they are also making and creating new aestheticism, new fields of sensitivity. Maybe they don't think about it, but they're making it, and that's also really interesting for me.
Yeah, thank you very much. And you, I think, talking about arts, the first word that comes to mind very logically is creativity. And I think something, Athena, that you touched upon also in your demonstration is how AI in education could also take a lot of different factors, elements that are quite complex to assess even as humans. And so I was curious to hear maybe your thoughts on how AI and education can collide, and education being such a sensitive topic. I was really curious to hear your thoughts.
I think that in education we have a lot of space to explore because we have to work with mostly young people that they do not know a lot of about themselves. So we have to help them to use AI in order to learn more. And what we are doing is we take and combine different things from different sciences, like social sciences or psychological sciences, and we say, okay, these tools are working for people. We can employ these findings in young people, and we can use AI that combines these tools in the best way in order to find the best, well, we are doing the information, so we're trying to find the best themes for the students, so the students can learn more through engaging with other students. So I think that in our case is that we take things, combine them, and feed them to AI to help students. So for me, AI is basically a means to help people.
All right, thank you. And I want to take just a small break to thank also the speakers for having come from far, from Luxembourg, from Spain, also from France and from Lille. Not so far, but still, thank you very much. And Olga as well for having come and in the context of strikes everywhere. So thank you again. So now I also want to maybe go back to the idea that the three of you specifically have also contributed and contribute actively to what is AI in Europe through your research projects or through maybe more the overall governance and support for this. So could you maybe, Evangelia, tell us, is there such a thing as a European vision of AI? Because we see indeed, and having worked in North America as other people in this room, we do see that there is a difference, but could you put words maybe on it and what you think there is?
I think the difference is, as I said, this European approach on AI and trustworthy AI and establishing kind of as I said, what is being tagged as the digital single market for AI. I mean, to allow, that this, and as I don't know how many of you know, this proposal for a draft AI regulation has a risk-based approach. So, I mean, it will only regulate really something that would consider high risk. But the majority of the applications, I mean, there is no hindrance there. So they can be kind of brought to the market very easily. And what we would like to allow is that to establish the kind of framework where this can happen very quickly. But as I said, the approach, the European approach, I would really say is really based also on the work of the high-level expert group that worked on this kind of recommendations and the guidelines into trustworthy AI. So the AI that we like to see in Europe is the one that respects the fundamental values that we praise and respect here in Europe. And I think like with GDPR, I mean, this is a model that we could also export, I mean, outside of Europe, this kind of trustworthiness. Because what is really essential in the end of the day, that it's not just the technology that's being developed in the lab, but that it's actually being taken up by the citizens as well. And they need to be able to trust. So, I mean, the system has to be transparent, explainable, and, I mean, robust in itself. So, I mean, in order to have this uptake that we expect also to happen in Europe, some things have to happen. And I think this is the framework that we'd like to establish here in Europe.
All right, thank you. And also from a research perspective, and I will look at you, Athena and Mark, but let's start with you, maybe Mark. Do you think that there is such a thing as a European vision also on research, or a European perspective on research that is maybe taking into account all the things that were said by Evangelia, the trustworthiness included?
Well, I can only support what Evangelia said. This is also true at the level of the researchers. There is really a concern for trustworthiness, for transparency, and there is a need for regulation, that's for sure, and maybe I can comment more on this, but there's a need for research, because, for instance, what is a trustworthy system? There is no measure of trustworthiness per se, so there is need for research there. What is explainability? Of course, everybody imagine what explainability is, but when it comes to actually measure it, it depends to whom you're talking, it depends of the context and everything, so there's a need for research. And as I already said, probably much of the research that's needed after the revolution I mentioned about deep learning is to hybridize with maybe more symbolic, like reasoning. You need to reason to be able to bound this system that you have learned from data, because everybody knows, I guess, in the room, the robotic laws of Asimov, the 3 laws of Asimov, that you should not harm a human and so on and so forth. But today it's absolutely impossible to implement these laws in robotic brains, if there is any around. And you need to work with reasoning, with formal methods, and there is a lot of research that's needed. And yes, now maybe to come back to the question, yes, I have the feeling that in Europe this is now really everybody has really realized this. Many colleagues from the US, we don't work so much with Chinese colleagues, but many colleagues from the US have also realized that. it's even more true in Canada or in Japan. But in Europe, there is this whole atmosphere around trustworthiness that's pregnant. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And Athena, I think you also, because of the nature of also who is financially supporting your research, showing that now there is public research, also private support. And so could you maybe give us and to the audience an example of how can also private companies embody this form of trustworthiness in your project, for instance, on education?
Actually, in my case, the company was very interesting on the concept of team formation, not only on education that we have been researching, but expanding it into internal use inside their own company or other companies. And in this process, they were very interested on explainability as well. So they wanted a way to justify why the algorithm gave us this this recommendation. So there can be a push from the industry towards the research on a specific way, because they need to justify that. And that was, in my case, the reason. They wanted something. They were requested. It was very interesting for us as well as researchers, because it is very it is necessary for a researcher to make their algorithms to be trusted by the users. So we had this very nice way of going.
All right, thank you for explaining a bit the process. And I think I will start also with myself. We have blind spots in AI research. And one of them is for our institute, for instance, here, Fari, in Brussels. We sometimes look at the technical aspect, the societal aspect, all the applications, and there are some fields that we sometimes don't really look at as much as we should. And art, I think, is definitely one field where there should be more, I think, inspiration drawn from arts, and also more collaboration. So we do see here and there things, but your projects showed that it's possible to use also art as an inspiration. Do you feel like there are not enough artists working with the scientists, and do you think even for your colleagues or acquaintances it's something that your experience maybe inspired them?
Yeah, of course. I think art and science field is quite niche, and there's of course plenty of things to do and collaboration. And I'm not directly working on AI, but on technology I feel that as an artist there's quite things that are really interesting, not in terms of not only, of course, innovation that can come to this process of interaction, but also fields of questioning. And I think AI is also not only about finding new innovation, but it's also, as an artist, really interesting on how deep it can get on new ways of seeing what is intelligence, what is consciousness, what is a robot, what is human, etc. And as an artist, this is the question that I would really tackle when I would be in collaboration with scientists.
Okay, thank you. And I think you touched upon the idea that sometimes there are things that are not present in a conversation about AI. And for me, I think it's an interesting question that I wanted to also ask you, is what do you think is missing in today's conversation about AI specifically in its role to society? So I will start with you. Sorry for that. And so if you have maybe some thoughts, because you have a very unique position for the governance, you have this bird-eyed view on the whole field in Europe, and you think there's something that is still missing?
I think a little bit what my colleague here said. I think what is important is this diversity aspect. I don't see it a lot yet happening. I hope to see more of that, because I think once we bring everybody together on the table and discuss and design, for example, AI systems or whatever, we will really truly innovate. I mean, we have things like science and technology and arts also funded by the European Commission, and people also not just talk about STEM skills, but STEAM skills with the arts involved. I think what is still missing for me, at least from what I've seen, and so far, is this discourse with the citizens, so with the end users of that, which I don't see a lot. So we design systems, but not really with them in the design process involved. So I think what we truly have to kind of work towards to is, because sometimes people will tell me, usually the answer I get is that's difficult to do and bring them in and everything. I do not accept normally that's difficult. I think I'd like to see that where people really try to do it. So it's not just interdisciplinarity, but it's also intersectoriality. So, and also bringing the end users, the citizens in the design process, in research projects. This is what I would like to see more.
No, that's a very good point. It's something that we see a lot more in research. Everybody talking about how citizens should be co-designers of the systems, but also consulted from the start and not only at the finish when things are done and it's like, okay, what do you think of it? And it's a comment that I hear more and more. And maybe, Mark, also, could you give us some insight? Have you ever seen or participated to projects where citizens were involved? Or how do you see that happening? What would be your recommendations on that?
Yes, I mean, I will come back to my favorite word when talking about AI these days. It's hybridization. Yes, we need to do hybridization, not only between symbolic, sub-symbolic, not only between AI and formal methods or the like, or applied math or whatever, but also with human and social sciences, like sociology, and this would indeed bring the citizen there with art, with sorry, yes, all the history and the like. And here I may divert a little bit from the question, because I think this kind of hybridization all around is maybe the only advantage that remains to the public research, academic research, compared to the big tech research, because big tech have a high let's say more financial budget and then can really attract the researchers, but they don't have this diversity that you can find in universities, in big research institutes. And so this is something we should not only push, but also cultivate and try to keep.
Okay, thank you. And Athena, do you think there's something missing also in the AI conversation today? Is there something that, from your perspective and experience, you think we should talk more about or hear more about?
Well, I will agree with that. We will need more people, citizens, to be engaged in this. So we want the citizens to not expect something magical from AI, but to be educated with what AI is, and to know what to expect and be involved in this. Not just see a black box and expect something magical coming out of it, but to understand and help the researchers on developing more smart, intelligent systems.
Thank you. And it's a perfect segue for the next question I had about also education. We see working daily, for instance, for us in Brussels with different entities, that sometimes there are misconceptions about the technology or the set of technologies that we have to re-explain every time what it is, and it's not a magic wand that will solve all problems. So I think it's a common frustration that we all might sometimes have. It's setting the expectations right, and education is key, starting with children, and I think a center like you are, the one you're into today, contributes to that, to a better understanding of what is behind the system that I interact with on a daily basis. And something you said, Dewi, is also that art could be useful for researchers to do something more than just publishing, to educate. And could you maybe extend a little bit on this idea of how art can be a key element of AI education?
I mean, I think not only art, but it's a matter of getting to the citizen, and I think it's a matter of pedagogy and adapting the pedagogy or the vocabulary or to your public. And I think once you get into one public, you cannot just copy paste to another public. You need to adapt the things, how you say it, etc. So I think there's a new way of documenting maybe that we need to invent and adapt to the different public that we have, and there's still many things to do in this.
Okay, thank you. And Evangela, can you give us some insights maybe on what is Europe's vision on how to educate on AI? What are the key priorities in your view?
I think awareness raising is important, but I think the one thing that I hear from all sides whenever we talk about this is really skills. So I mean, the skills development from at school, so education settings, but also upskilling, reskilling, and actually for also for the citizens to understand. I mean, I don't know now who said it from my colleagues, to understand what's capable, what are the limitations, because I think sometimes the public thinks that AI is capable, like what is understood as artificial general intelligence, but we are very far away from that. So I think once people understand what are the limitations, but also once people understand that it's not there to take away jobs, it's actually there to take away dull, repetitive, you know, dirty or dangerous jobs, then I think maybe we will have a better discourse also with the public, because I see the actual kind of potential now in what is also called in collaborative intelligence, in bringing the best of the two worlds of the human intelligence and artificial intelligence. But I see the skills aspect, and it's being repeated, whether you talk about, I mean, I don't know, big data, high performance computing, quantum, in all of these areas, the skills is a problem. It's not just AI. I mean, it's AI and then probably applied to a specific field. But I mean, skills development should really start very early onwards. So not in university, really at school, and if possible at primary school.
And that leads to, for me, Mark, you have also been involved as a researcher in the French AI strategy. And so maybe you also had some ideas on how to, as Evangelia said, improve the skills at the national level, which is a big task.
Yes, I mean, okay. Anyway, in France we have a crisis of education at large, not only education about AI skills. But maybe I will build on what Evangelia said. Yes, we need to upskill people, and starting from school, of course, and this is important to avoid these misunderstandings or the fantasies that AI is raising. So it was mentioned artificial general intelligence, and some people and many people simply are scared that the machines will take over the rule over the world. I mean, this is pure fantasy. It doesn't mean, so I will have two answers to this. So the first one is yes, maybe it's good that some people do research on this, because on the way they will find something, even if I don't believe it will come to anything close to rule the world. But on the other hand, only by upskilling can we avoid that these fantasies, in fact, have a very bad role, and people get lost. And so it might result first in rejecting completely AI, which would be really a pity, because AI can do really a lot of good to mankind, to humanity. But also it can help, let's say, ill-directed people to take over, not the machine, but some other people, like government using AI in the wrong way, or big tech companies that cannot be mastered anymore by the governments, and all these dangers are there because mainly because people are not aware and are not skilled enough about what AI can do and cannot do.
Okay, and so educating on also the technical realities behind AI is key. And one aspect that I also hear a lot, and we work on a project, for instance, here on creating a Belgian open access content on education for educators in schools. And something we hear and we heard and we decided to do was to also integrate ethical education about AI ethics. And so I was curious, Athena, maybe as you're also finishing your PhD research, is it something that you've been exposed to already, AI ethics courses? Do you think that you see already a change or a trend in this direction?
Actually, last week I was attending a summer school, and there was a lot about the ethics on AI and how Europe is trying to be the more moral on AI. So I think it is very important, because we set the boundaries on what smart systems can do, and after that we can discard all these dystopic images we have from movies about AI taking over. So by doing this ethical perspective and learning our systems to follow some moral values, some ethical values that we found ethical. Of course, it's not the same for everyone, but for some people's are moral values, we can set these boundaries and have, let's say, a controlled AI that would help people, not do something that we don't want to.
All right, thank you. And when it comes also to talking about AI and education, I think a key element is that when new generations learn about AI, we see now, at least for instance in Belgium, that universities are of course the natural gateway to learning all about AI and ethics. But we also see, just in the building we are located in, for instance, in the center of Brussels, a lot of other organizations that teach about AI, coding, programming, telling you that you can also become an AI active part of, someone actively part of the AI scene, employable immediately. And are there sort of guidelines, maybe Evangelia, on, all these organizations that also arise to teach all these new skills and all of that? Would you favor maybe more education in universities, or is there something that Europe is also doing for all these other organizations that contribute to more education about AI?
I think, being interested in that, you have to see also to be motivated. So the question is, for example, also when you go into schools, how do you motivate kids, to pick up, let's say, coding or everything else? So, what I would like ideally to see is that we take the lessons learned from other areas where they already tried to use and do the skills development and learn from that. And then I think if it's with a purpose, I think you get people motivated and engaged in that. So if we really want to get kids or get their attention, their curiosity, we have to really motivate them into going into a direction. But I think we have to kind of establish the means where we can nurture this kind of curiosity and then make things happen. And I think that I'd like to see more happening now, because I think sometimes you get the feeling that history repeats itself and the same errors are being made. So hopefully once we learn from other kind of experiences, that we can really adapt them and really get things going on from there.
Could you name one of the errors that you think is reoccurring?
I think I tried with my kids going to these coding classes for them to get them, engaged into STEM and everything, but the ultimate goal was missing. Why should I learn this? So, what can I do with it? What can I, you have to show the examples and then kind of get their curiosity going on, and then actually the motivation to be on board. So the why is sometimes missing. Why should I learn this? And this, I think, people can help with that, when you design such courses, that you give them the ultimate kind of goal and motive to do that.
Do you have any thoughts on that, maybe, Mark?
Yes. So you mentioned so many places where you can learn kind of AI, and I think there's a danger there because there is no control on these. Nobody has controlled the level of what they're teaching. There's no recognized diploma, so there's a need for regulation also there. But this is also because there's not enough staff in education, in academia, whatever, because there was a sudden demand for such education, and academia was not able to provide what's needed.
So the solution then for you is reinforcing the higher education system and providing more supports?
And not only higher, but even a bit lower than higher. Yes.
All right.
Absolutely.
I will look at my colleagues and check how much time do I have. All right, it's done. I want to really thank all the team that was behind this event. Anna, Eva, Holger, Marianne, Joost. So a big thank you to all of them, and also to all the people behind the vision, Claire, Elise, Human AI Net, Taylor, AI for Media, and so forth. So thank you very much for attending, and it was a pleasure talking with you, and thank you for coming, for a lot of you, maybe from afar. So, yes. Yes? Okay, we have time for then maybe questions. Please, David.
Okay. Hello. Yes. Thank you very much for all the very nice talk that you have. So you mentioned something that I think it's quite important is what kind of discussion we're having with the non-specialized public actually about AI. Something that actually found quite interesting is that in many of the videos there was shown like blue holograms. No, I have never seen a blue hologram generated by AI. I don't know why it's an image that is such recurrent, but it never happens. And I think these kind of concepts of ideas are misleading what we can get or what we can do with the AI today or what we want to do. What I wanted to precisely ask you, because maybe you have directed many projects on AI and you have some knowledge in the governance, is how much actually resources are devoted to have this discussion with the general public? Because yes, it is nice, we want to have this discussion, but how much of a project is devoted to public outreach? Or how much of the life of a PhD is devoted to teach the PhD how to reach actually the general public? So my belief is that if we want to actually reach the people, we need to teach the people that is developing the technology how to engage with them, as you say. So we need to find this motivation. It's difficult to create the motivation, but it's even more difficult if we do not teach the people that are doing the things how to develop these skills. So if you can comment on this, I will be very happy. Thank you.
Mark?
Okay, so the short answer is 0. I mean, when we start a research project, we target the research results and so forth, and we really don't really pay attention to dissemination. But there's another answer, thank God. We are lucky to be in some institution that have some communication service, and these people do what we should do, probably, which is to come and ask for our results and then try to disseminate them into the general public. So thanks to them, yes, there is more than 0. But yes, I have to confess the basic concern of researcher is close to 0. There are exceptions. Some people are really very good at this, but mostly not at all.
Evangeline?
I think it's like also learning languages, because the majority of the researchers, they can communicate very easily with their kind of fellow researchers. So scientific publications, not a problem. But they don't speak the language, to explain things in simple terms to the general public. So it's something that I usually comment when I work with the projects is that, okay, where's your public communication to the general public? And they try to explain it, and it's so complicated. And I really get the feeling that they too need some kind of skills development for researchers to communicate with the general public, to be able to explain in simple terms what they're doing. I mean, those videos, they were actually meant to be also shown to the general public, but I think not all of them work the way they should. So I think there is a lot of effort. We, in the research projects that we are funding, we bring it more and more inside that you really have to have the end users on board. There is a pilot project now that will open in 22, actually it's opened. We presented it also in the Info Day, where you have to have the citizens on board, so in the design process. And we had a topic that we called for last year in tackling bias and discrimination in AI, and that as well has to have the end users on board. So I mean, this is something what we preach, but we would like to see more and more diversity, but also this kind of dialogue, the discourse with the general public. So researchers, scientists have to learn to speak that language. That's necessary indeed, yes.
And also speaking of the images, I think we have sort of a rule at our institute is to avoid the human hand and the robot hand touching each other. I think this should be forbidden. This is the new moral rule that Europe should have. And maybe I had a question for you, Dewi, because you might look at all the imagery being exposed to researchers we have in our research PowerPoints, videos and all, recurring images, an artistic imagery that you might have maybe a thought on.
Yeah, I see. I mean, they all look the same for me. Like they have a color, imagery, etc. that kind of look the same. I have the same feeling. This is also my interest when creating robots, etc. That there's a new aestheticism being developed, and there's a huge impact on when you communicate image, but when you create robots also, when you choose the color, the volume. Okay, most researchers probably don't have time, and it's not the interest to choose, okay, this color. But there's a huge impact, I think, on the image it brings to the public, on how we see it, how we feel it, etc. I think this is something maybe we need to take attention. I don't know where, what medium, but yeah.
And Athena, also maybe how do you, for instance, for your project, communicate about that to convince or to explain to others? Are there rules that we should have in mind?
For me, I'm trying to avoid anything mathematical or very specific to the AI. I'm trying to explain the purpose and what is the goal, and try to be very simple, describe my work on a very simple set of steps on how to solve the problem. So because I can understand that people will not know what I'm talking about, and it is very complex for talking. I find it very complex to talk to citizens with no background, but I'm trying to be as simple as I can be and avoid details that are unnecessary for the person, so they can just understand the problem and how to reach a solution.
Okay.
That's
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, please.
So just to let you know, we'll just take one last question from the public now, and afterwards you can ask all the questions you want to all the speakers
With
here
drinks.
during the cocktail with drinks.
So I think that one of the sources of confusion when talking to the general public is the use of language about human activities referred to machines, algorithms, models, etc. Like learning, for example. So machine learning is not the kind of learning that we do when learning a new skill, a new topic, a new argument, something. Do you agree? And if yes, is it too late to change the language that we use? Thanks.
All right, Mark.
Well, it's too late to change, that's for sure. Yes, but I mean, you see also people in the street that talk to their car like it was a person or things like that. So I guess this is something that's done everywhere by everybody. So probably it creates some confusion, yes. But then it becomes difficult to explain that machine learning is very different from human learning, and it is. I agree. I mean, it's absolutely they don't learn the same thing the same way. But in both cases, you learn to recognize cats from dogs. So it's very difficult to explain. You have to go into the detail that you try to avoid in general. So
Maybe Athena or Evangelia. Athena, any words on that?
Well, I cannot say anything about the language. I found it understandable, but I'm on the research side, so I think that the key is that use this language, but relate it. Explain that you use this language because you're trying to mimic a human. So if you are learning in machine learning, it means something very specific. It's not a general learning as it is for humans, but if a human was trying to do this specific thing as a machine learning model does, it will do the same thing. So it is learning. So I would say that the best way is to try to convince the people that we use this language because we are trying to mimic an action of human.
And maybe I have a reverse question for you, Dewey, but how is it like to explain your work to people in AI, maybe who also have a different vocabulary? And that's also the starting point for most of the projects that we have, is we feel like we use similar words, but a completely different understanding of vocabulary. So maybe how did that go for you?
I would say that it's easier because I have something manual, and I tend to avoid I think vocabulary, sometimes language is not the best mean to get to connection. Usually when I present my work, I try to, as you've probably seen, to make people touch, have a feeling, use other sense. And I think maybe also we need to not only use language as a mean of explaining and communication, but also showing, touching, etc., experimenting, etc.
Thank you. And I have yep, please.
I think you can change the language, but it's like with teachers. I mean, not all teachers will be able to explain in an easy terms and for you to embrace a specific subject. So it's specific soft skills that you need as well, I think, in order to explain things in easy terms. And sometimes I think that if you cannot explain it in easy terms, you're not really knowing what you're talking about. So I think it's a talent, I think, to be able to be a storyteller, to explain something in easy terms with examples and everything. So everything's possible, but I think it's the skill set of the person then probably. It's not all of them. It's like not all teachers. But I mean, some are better pedagogues than others. So.
I think as a final maybe point also again for you, something that is fascinating to me is I think in Belgium in research, everybody a lot of people come from everywhere. So we are non-native English speakers for 99% of the part. We do work, live, breathe in English for all the things related to AI. And I think that speaks to probably a lot of us where we came from different places, but then we still have to talk about something in a language that is not ours. And I think in the European Union context, it's even more important as things have to be translated, words have to convey about the same meaning. And maybe I was curious, Evangela or Mark, I saw you taking the mic. Maybe do you have any thoughts on that? Because building a common vocabulary is sometimes a bit of a challenge when you have such a multicultural, multi-vocabulary language environment.
Yes, but now that UK has left Europe, we could get rid of English.
Are you suggesting to go back to French? That would be good for us. All right. Any thoughts on that? Or yeah.
I'm a visual person, so I like the visual. So I think you can explain a lot of things without necessarily using words. But I think we have now machine translation systems that would allow us to communicate with everybody around the world. Maybe not with languages that are underrepresented. So this is something that we should aim for. But I think it's possible to communicate. I can communicate with people if both sides want to really communicate. And without even language, so even with signs I can communicate, I think. But it's the will there to communicate. I think that's essential in the beginning, not necessarily the language.
So visuals are important, and I hope you will help me in my fight against the generic images that we see. All right, thank you. But thank you all. I think a big round of applause for the speakers. Thank you very much.